for this presentation, I'm going to go into basically a brief intro of the archives, also kind of share some resources of how you can accessing archival materials online, and then wrap it up with a discussion about preserving the union's history and how you can kind of manage and take care of your different kinds of records that you produce as communications professionals. So whenever I give a presentation to the union, I like to start off with just an explainer of what I'm talking about when I say an archives or when I'm talking about the UAW archives, because archive is a term that gets around very, very loosely, especially in an online space. But I'm talking about a collecting archive. It's also called a repository, and that's an institution that collects materials from individuals, families, and organizations. And essentially, staff at an archive will appraise inactive records for enduring historical value. We preserve them, and then most importantly, we facilitate access to these materials to different kinds of researchers. And archives keep these items because they are verifiable pieces of evidence of what has happened in the past so that people can use them and understand where we came from. And I know some of you have been to the archives before, so this building here in the top will look familiar. This is the Reuther Library where I work. And we're called a library, but that's not quite accurate. We're actually an archive, as I mentioned before. So when you look at our stacks, our shelving areas, you're not going to see books. You're not going to see DVDs. You're going to see boxes like the boxes here of GM and UAW agreements from over the years. And if you crack open one of those boxes, oftentimes they're filled with folders. That's how we organize our materials. So that's kind of a little view of what it's like to look through an archival collection. We're an important place for many different reasons, but I think we stand out because we are the largest labor archives in North America. It really is a special place if you're connected to the labor movement. And we're located, or we're part of the Wayne State University Library System. So that's located in Detroit, just like the UAW. And we are such a large labor archives because we have official partnerships with different labor organizations. So we're the official archives for the UAW, as you know, but also American Federation of Teachers, AFSCME, Service Employees International Union, and several other labor unions. We are the official archives of the UAW. The collections are massive. That's because we're collecting materials from the International Union, but also regional offices, locals, and even individuals connected to the UAW. We even connect records from dissident groups within the union. If you think about a banker's box, those boxes with the handles that you see in your office, if you were to fill those up with materials from the archives, it would be 14,000 of those bankers boxes. So the UAW archives, it's a massive collection spread out across over 400 different unique collections. And we make these materials open to researchers from the general public. People come from all over the world to look at the archival materials. So it really is a special destination for labor history. And here just some kind of broad examples of types of things we collect. Most of the collection materials are paper, like this page from, I think it was a conference on collective bargaining in 1973. We have a lot of photographs in our collections, like this one from the Battle of the Overpass. I'll talk more about those later on. And we also have many different kinds of media formats. This is one example. This is a vinyl 45 record for a song called The Ballad of Walter Reuther. And I don't want to go through all of the things on here, but I just kind of want to put some of our more high profile collections on your radar and to show you that when I talk about the UAW archives, it's not one big bucket. It's actually spread across numerous collections. Like I mentioned, it's over 400 collections that make up the UAW archives. So, records from departments at Solidarity House, locals like the Local 600 records here, from individuals like the James Lindahl papers. So we're getting materials from many different sources, and they're usually named after where the records come from. And if you want to see what we have, most of our collections aren't digitized, but we have basically inventories, we call them finding aids, available online. Visit reuther.wayne.edu. As Roy mentioned, and as many of you know, I'm the UAW archivist. And in that role, I preserve and provide access to the records of enduring value for the UAW. I'm an employee of Wayne State University, but I'm also the official archivist for the union. And there's an agreement between the union and the university to pay for my salary. And I manage on a day-to-day basis, basically I manage the records of the UAW and help connect people to those materials with an emphasis on assisting the UAW and staff and members make use of archival materials. I think something I really love about my job that I think really separates it from many other archivist jobs in my field is that for most archivists, they keep us in maybe a basement, maybe a windowless room, and you're just working with records all day, and you don't get to do a lot of interacting with the general public. But the UAW, I think it's special because it knows about its history, it values its history, it's making active use of its archival materials. And so I get to do some really fun special projects with the union. I think I saw Justin in here from the communications department. I get to do some really cool work with him and some of his colleagues. So it's a really cool part of my job. But I think probably the most, I would say, high profile thing I've done so far is a series of videos. I think probably you've seen some of them on the social media feed, but I'm going to show you one of these real quick. Hi, my name's Gavin Strassel, and I'm the archivist at the Walter P. Reuther Library at Wayne State University. This bass drum was part of a small marching band that came from UAW Local 3, which represented workers at the Dodge main plant in Detroit. And when the UAW finally organized Chrysler after a long sit-down strike in 1937, the workers marched out of the factory and they're led by the marching band in this bass drum. You know, the rhythmic pounding of the drum really added to the sense of triumph and was a huge moment for those workers. So, you know, that's just one example of these videos. And I think what I like about them and why I like to show at least one example from them is that I think they do a really great job with the editing of this. They bring the object to life, and I think they show that, you know, they're just because something is older doesn't mean it has to be stodgy, that you can have fun with it, that you can make it interesting and active and do interesting things with video. And also keep in mind that when this video came out, I think it was a month or weeks before the beginning of the stand-up strike in 2023. So people really responded to it. It wasn't officially connected to what was going on then, but it was, you know, spoke to the zeitgeist in the union at that moment. So I think it's an interesting example of what you can do with our collection materials here at the archives. This next part, I just want to highlight some of the materials that we have in the archival collections that I think are especially useful to people from Luca. First, we have a massive collection of photographs from the UAW from a number of years covering a number of subjects and from many different parts and corners of the UAW. And something that's really great is a lot of them have been scanned over the years. Just a fraction, really, but that fraction is pretty big. And for the ones that aren't scanned, if there's something that you really want that hasn't been digitized yet, I'm happy to, you know, kind of go into the collections and scan them on demand for you. And those resources, a lot of them are available online. Probably the easiest access to thing is the UAW photo galleries, which has thousands of digitized photos. Many of them you see here in this slide. That's available. You can see the web address here. I'm going to provide a PDF with links to all these resources. So don't feel like you have to write down these web addresses because there'll be a document that will have all this information for you later on. Also, the UAW Image Gallery is a really great resource. I think there's about 15,000 photos in there. And that's actually something we built for the then Public Relations Department. So it's an internal site for the UAW. So you need a login to access it, but I oversee that. So if that's something where you're not quite finding enough content in the kind of the UAW photo galleries, reach out to me and I'll create a profile for you for the UAW Image Archive. And another really great resource is the content I put up on social media. That's stuff that, you know, the photo quality might not always be the best. I try to take nice photos with my phone, but it's just a way when I come across interesting content, I take a photo and I put it on Blue Sky and share it just because it's so easy to share stuff on the fly that way. And I know the public relations staff at the UAW has done a really good job, you know, taking that content and repurposing it on the UAW's main feeds. And I love seeing the stuff that I post on Blue Sky make its way in other parts of the union's kind of communication. So it's a very rich resource if you follow along if you're on Blue Sky. And one quick thing about that too is that you don't have to, but if you do use some of our photos or any other content, if you cite the Walter P. Reuther Library, that's greatly appreciated just because it raises awareness of the archives. People are interested in doing research themselves. They know where to look So, like I said, not required, but something that is very much appreciated. And I know Justin, I keep calling him out here, but he does a really great job when he uses content from the archives, citing the Walter P. Reuther Library. And I know it's something that a lot of my colleagues at the archives, they're really impressed by the job he does, kind of raising awareness of the archives and the UAW's social media posts. Another thing that I found in my time as the UAW archivist for content, whether it's, graphics or photos or just stories that has been really useful is old UAW publications. They have really interesting art, like these covers of Ammo magazine from, I believe that these are from the 1990s, but many, many hundreds of different publications in our collections. We have a lot of complete runs. The only downside is most of them are undigitized. But if you're able to access any of these materials or if you need scans of them, just let me know. There's a lot of really interesting content to be mined. One resource we do have digitized publications is in the Walter Reuther Digital Archive. And this is a site we created a couple years ago with grant funding from the Reuther Memorial Foundation. And it has hundreds of issues, fully digitized publications of the United Automobile Worker, and then Solidarity when that newspaper changed its name and became a magazine. And they're available as PDFs, the word's searchable, and you're able to download them. So it's a really great resource for that. I will say also that the digital archive, it also has a lot of photos, some really great historical photo, video, and audio content, and much, much more. So I highly recommend checking out that website because it's a rich resource. One of the most important points I hope to convey to you today is that these archival collections, they're not just for historians, they're not just for, high-level academics to use. They're available for everybody, and they're here for you, especially to use. And that your union locals, they can really benefit from tying these past to their current campaigns. A lot like what Roy was saying in his introduction. And using these historical materials in your messaging doesn't mean the content needs to be stodgy, doesn't mean it's didactic. You can have a lot of fun with it. And using the archives it really can help you make inspiring and moving posts that engage your local members. And this is a video here that I think really exemplifies that. The union released it on its social media feeds back in August, and it's about organizing at a Blue Oval. Okay, so I'm gonna play it now.
1941, Ford Auto Workers changed history. Facing workplace injuries, exhaustion, and deaths on the job,
Ford workers took a stand that would echo through generations.
They came together and organized.
And, as United Auto Workers, won the right to negotiate over all of their working conditions.
This history is not just a source of pride, it's a lesson in solidarity.
To show what's possible when working class people stand together.
Today, Kentucky is the center of the battery.
We're building the future of the auto industry, and this transformative moment requires the same worker power that guarantees our safety and job security.
Whether in Dearborn, Michigan or Glendale, Kentucky, the technology may differ, but the risks remain the same.
wherever corporate greed puts our lives at risk, the fight for a safe workplace binds us together.
It's our time to sit across the table for management as equals.
We want a legally binding contract that guarantees our wages,
Healthcare.
PTO policies,
and health and safety.
Workers in Michigan began a wave that changed America.
Battery workers in Ohio, Tennessee, and Indiana have already taken this step and won.
Now it's our turn.
I'm ready to have a voice at Boss.
I'm ready to have a voice at Boss.
As United Auto Workers.
I love this video because it's really great content if it pops up on your social media feed. But a lot of those historic images, video, press clippings, those are things that I scanned or digitized and provided access to staff at the communications department. You can see I provided access to materials from all these archival collections listed on the left there, and they were able to incorporate those. A lot of those things that are just still images, but then splice it, with the interviews with the workers today, tying what was going on in 1941 with what's going on in 2025, and, just bringing in that really propulsive music and editing and creating something that I think is really powerful. So I think that's an amazing example of the power of the archives at the Reuther Library. And just to kind of put a bow on this point, By finding meaningful parallels in the historical record to current operations, your messaging has the power to facilitate membership buy-in and sway public opinion. I'm going to shift gears here, talking about what we have at the archives, and next discuss, some practical advice on preserving and managing your union's historical records. There are various reasons to archive or even just delve into your local's records of enduring value. And some of the ones I hear about most commonly from people within the union, they include maybe your storage in your offices, it's becoming scarce, or maybe you're moving to new offices and all of a sudden you have to clean out those storage spaces that have been accumulating materials for decades. Well, why not donate them to the archives? Or maybe your local has a big anniversary coming up and leadership wants you to start bringing in or bringing together the historical records so that you can better tell the story of the union's history and maybe produce a book or something kind of like this pamphlet Local 600 made for their 75th anniversary. Or maybe you're just proud of your local's history and you want to make sure that your union brothers and sisters' accomplishments and efforts are preserved and make their way into the archives. And no matter the reason, it's always good to take a proactive step to get a handle on your local's old records. So that said, what I'm going to tell you, like in this advice, it's not a comprehensive overview of how to preserve your records or manage them. That's a topic that would take many sessions, and I'd be keeping you here all night. But I hope to convey, some stuff that you can implement easily and to help get the process started. And like I mentioned at the end, I'm going to provide a list of resources that are available online that you can consult for more in-depth advice on preservation of your union's physical and digital documents. So advice on donating your records to the archives, advice on preserving things like podcasts, web archiving, things like that. Before starting a large-scale project to preserve your local's records, the most important thing to begin with is to first check with your local's leadership. You don't want to duplicate previous efforts or even create a competing preservation plan. Also, it's important to remember you're not going to be preserving everything. You're probably only going to be able to preserve a fraction of what your union's created. And also, that if you're prepping materials to send them to the archives, don't include anything you wouldn't want the general public to see. We make our collections available to all kinds of researchers, so you'll want to keep out records that have things like social security numbers, health information, things like that. But if there are records where it's stuff that, it's important that you think should be in the archives, but maybe in this moment it's not for public consumption, just keep in mind that when we bring in stuff from the union, we put those materials in, I guess I like to call it a quarantine for 10 to 15 years after the date they were created before we make them publicly available. So just keep in mind that those materials you're not gonna deposit them one week and then the next week people are looking through them. That there's gonna be a period of time where oftentimes those issues kind of subside. I'm sorry. Okay. So when UAW locals are getting ready to send their records to the archives, oftentimes the first question that's asked is, what do we keep? And for your purposes, try to think of it like this, because you're storytellers oftentimes. What are the records that tell your local story? If someone were making a movie or writing a book about your local, what are the details that can make an accurate and compelling narrative? Also, what are the more mundane things that can be left out? I was thinking about it like this, where if let's say you're watching, one of those movies that's like a biopic about a rock star, and you're watching one about Prince, which hopefully they make that movie someday. But, if you're watching Prince, the movie, you'd want to see moments that, where you see what inspired him to write Purple Rain or how he became such a legendary guitarist. But if that same movie also included scenes where he's ordering a sandwich or he's waiting in line at the DMV, that's going to be a boring drag. That's going to bring down the interesting parts of the story. So in that same spirit, when trying to decide if you should keep something, ask yourself, does it tell the essential parts of your local story? A collective bargaining agreement, executive committee meeting minutes, those things you would want to keep. But maybe a box of receipts, a red polo shirt with your local's logo on it. Those things are a little more typical, a little more mundane. You wouldn't want to send those to the archives. And for this audience, it's people who work in union communications, the things that you make, that you produce every day that we would want at the archives, that would include things like the publications you're writing or editing, your your local social media posts if you're able to download those, photographs and video taken at union events, the podcasts that I hear more and more locals are making to communicate to members. So those are, in general, the types of things we want to keep. And I have a couple of resources listed here that you can consult. Truth be told, they're not the most up-to-date things. And the first one I especially need to update for kind of more, I think, modern types of records, but they're still very helpful in figuring out what to keep or not to keep. They have lists on each of those topics. But the first one is something I wrote up called The Introduction to the U Archives and Instructions for Sending Records to the Walter Library. And the other one is How to Keep Union Records, a guide for local union officers and staff. And it's from 1992, but it is still very solid and is foundational to the work we do at the Reuther Library and bring records in from labor unions. And like I said, both of those are available online, and there will be links to them later on. Something else that when you're kind of managing and assembling the records at your local, it can be a difficult process, but I think there are ways to kind of turn it into something that can engage your local's community. And I have a couple of things here, but one that I want to highlight is an event that I've heard people do that is really successful. When you're looking through your storage spaces, oftentimes you find a batch of photos and maybe there's some notes about where they came from, but oftentimes a lot of the information that people want to know about each photo is missing. Like who are the individuals in this photo? When was it taken? What is the event that they're attending at that moment? And without that contextual information, it really zaps the photo of its historical relevance. If I'm looking through those photos and trying to organize them as an archivist, if there's no information attached, I'm throwing that into a folder titled miscellaneous, and nobody wants that to happen because nobody looks in the miscellaneous folders. Just something I know from working with researchers. But, if you have an event where you bring in retirees or people who've been with the union for a long time, and you have them look through those photos and they identify the people in them or when they're from, things like that, all of a sudden you're infusing those photos with a lot more historical relevance. They're going to be a lot more useful to researchers or to the union down the road. And it's a really fun time for the people working on it. It's just a really pleasant trip down memory lane. So that's one thing I kind of an idea I wanted to give to this audience. This next part about preserving digital materials, it might be the most relevant part to this audience, just given how pretty much today we work exclusively with digital records. Also, just how many more records we create now that we've moved on from paper records mostly. And, I think for many of us, I'm dealing with an influx of materials, and I've heard people say I'm drowning in content, I'm drowning in information. So getting help on how to better organize your digital materials can be really helpful. And though the logistics of keeping digital records, it's very different than paper records for obvious reasons. The idea of what to keep or not to keep, it's oftentimes very similar. Some people have an idea that, oh, digital archives, we can just keep everything. It's easy. You can word search what you're looking for. But that's not true. That's a great way to max out your digital storage. But also, if there's just too much content that people don't really want, when they search for something, it's going to be hard for them to pick out what is actually relevant to their research. So you still have to weed your records when you're working with digital materials. And just a piece of word of wisdom, I would say, if your local has a YouTube feed where you keep videos or you keep video or photos on Facebook or maybe you have an Instagram feed, it's a great way for putting content out there, communicating with the members. But those social networks, they are not archives. They're not good places to keep your materials long term. You don't know how those services are going to change down the road, if your materials will be available even 5 years from now. I think you look at how Facebook has changed over the years, it's pretty striking. And, who knows if what we've posted 10 years ago, if that's just going to be deleted someday. So if there's stuff that's important to you on those sites, it's good to download them or keep the originals and kind of more adequately preserve them, not using those websites. And another detail is when you upload to YouTube and whatnot, the file, it's usually degraded and it's a worse version than what you have on your hard drive. So in terms of like digital preservation, it really kind of diminishes the quality of your media files. Digital preservation, it can be an immense undertaking, but today I just want to share a couple of easy recommendations that you can start implementing in the near future. And real quick, I want to give a shout out to my friend Elena. She's the digital archivist at the University of Michigan's archives, and she has way more experience on this topic than I do. So I consulted with her with this. So a lot of the resources that you're seeing today come from her. So just wanted to acknowledge that. But I would say the first thing to do is to create a written inventory to account of where everything is stored digitally. So every computer, every storage drive, the backups you're using, the cloud services that you're utilizing, make a list of that. And in addition, make a list if it's something that requires a login, who is the person who has the login? Who is the person who owns that account? Because if only one person does, if all of a sudden they can't log in for whatever reason, you lose it completely. And I've heard stories from people from locals who they were keeping a lot of active records on a Google Drive and it was working great. And then somebody passes away suddenly, or maybe they quit or move on for whatever reason, and that Google Drive or Dropbox, whatever it is, that no one has the login in it for anymore. And they know what they need is on that cloud storage drive, but they can't access it. So that's a really frustrating thing they have to deal with. The second thing I want to communicate is that you want to solidify your digital storage. And basically, if you keep all your content on a single hard drive, especially something that's kept locally at the office, it really puts stuff at risk. If your computer crashes, if a pipe bursts over your server and zaps it, you lose all that content. So for important files, that have lasting value, you're going to want to implement something called the 3-2-1 rule. So the first part of that is you keep 3 copies of your data in different places. And that means it's stored on at least 3 different servers. And then you keep your data stored in 2 different mediums. So that might mean it's stored on a computer, or it's stored in an external hard drive, or cloud storage, or some other option. And then finally, you keep 1 copy offsite. And that might mean a scheduled backup to a server in a centralized building, or backing up to a cloud service like on Amazon Cloud Storage. And that means that, if you have things backed up on your computer and in an external hard drive, but it's in the same office and a meteor out of the blue just hits the building and levels it, you've lost your computers, but because you've stored stuff off-site, you'll be able to at least get access to your old files. Another really important part of this is having good file naming conventions for your digital materials, because it helps you keep your stuff organized, and it's also the easiest way to add basic description to each file. If you use generic or bad file names like some of the ones below, a digital item, it might get lost, it might get buried, even on your own hard drive. If you label something like president.jpg, who knows what that is? But if you see that it's Sean Fain speech 2023-09-15, you see, oh, this is a speech that President Fain gave in September of 2023. It just adds a lot more information to it. Here's some basic advice for file naming conventions. You don't want the names to be too long, but you want them to be descriptive. You don't want to use special characters, and you want to have a consistent way you date the files. So the thing we recommend, though you don't have to do this, is year, month, and day. So that, like I said, the most important thing is, being consistent. Another important thing, though I'm not going to spend too much time on this, is choosing good file formats for the different type of stuff you have. It's always kind of a struggle between, what's efficient, what doesn't take up too much space versus what keeps stuff safely preserved. But I think for a lot of the work you're doing, using things like JPEG or, MP4, MP3s, it's usually good enough. But if you're holding on to stuff long term, you do risk your files getting corrupted over time. And so if it's something that you're going to keep in storage for a number of years, you might want to use one of those bigger file formats that doesn't compress your digital files, things like TIFF, WAV, a .move. So just some recommendations. The main thing I would recommend is being wary of storing your records long-term in proprietary file formats. Those are file formats that require usually a paid specific type of software to open. And that's because there's a chance that maybe in the future they change something about the software, or they make it a lot more expensive and you're not able to buy it anymore, or not everybody in the office can buy it. Or maybe the company goes out of business and then in 5 years, when you have a new computer, you can't open up that file. So things like Google Docs, QuickTime, they're really useful in the short term, but in the long term, you don't want to rely on them. And this is the last part of my presentation, but it's about sending archives or sending records to the archives. And there's no standard way to do this. And really, it's going to require a consultation between you and other people from your local and me, the archivist. So the first step would be to reach out to me. I have my contact information here, but set up a Zoom meeting so we can chat about this and the logistics and what to keep, how to send it, things like that. But if you just want to kind of see what the basic process is like, that document I mentioned earlier, the Introduction to the UA Archives and Instructions for Sending Records to the Library, is really great. So I would recommend that. But for now, I have my contact information here. If you have any questions about anything I talked about, feel free to contact me here. Also, you can follow me on Blue Sky if you're on that service. And if you want to learn more about the archives, visit us at reuther.wayne.edu.